Hey, Kris.
Hey, Leann, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
You too. I think we're here today to talk about emotions in the workplace. Would you get us started?
Yes, emotions in the workplace. So let's start out with talking about what the problem really is. Most people think that emotions don't belong in the workplace, but that's sort of an old thought because we're all human beings and human beings are emotional beings. So we naturally have emotions and we naturally bring them into the workplace because we're spending so much time there. So being human beings that we are, it is important that we understand this aspect of what we bring into the workplace in terms of having courageous conversations that we can actually talk about this.
So true. So true. I want to let everybody know exactly what we're talking about here in terms of emotions. We're talking about the typical range of emotions that someone might feel in the workplace. We're not talking about levels of emotions that might need professional help, or people who might need professional help with that. And then also, when we're talking about feelings and emotions, we're using those terms interchangeably here. If you hear us use them both, just to be simple, they mean the same thing for purposes of today. And then also, we want to try to help people form a new mindset maybe around emotions and think of them as data. And what that will do is it'll help you to learn more about yourself and help you to read others better. And it'll give you a lot more information in a conversation. I mean, after all, we know emotional intelligence is a key factor in success for leaders and everyone, life, work, and relationships, right? So since we know emotional intelligence is that important, then clearly emotions have a place in the workplace.
Absolutely. Yes, so emotional intelligence is super important to have that as a basis for operating inside your organization. So it's about yourself, awareness of yourself, awareness of other people. But I also wanted to offer a caution, which was really to not make assumptions about the emotions and feelings of other people. And one way to do this is to really interact with them from a place of humble inquiry.
Oh, I like that. I've never heard that term. Can you say more about that? Because it sounds like something that might actually take a lot of courage.
Yes. Well, humble inquiry comes from a theorist by the name of Edgar Schein. He's done a lot of research, and humble inquiry really is the practice of a conversation in which you are doing, I'll say, really sincere inquiry, really asking questions that you don't know the answer to, and also doing that with the intention of deepening the relationship and building trust with another person. So it's a very specific intention behind a humble inquiry type of conversation.
So what you're saying is you might be sensing someone's feeling something, but don't just assume what that means and have an open conversation with them about what that means.
Exactly. So
Okay.
it is about asking questions that you really truly do want to know the answer to, and that you probably don't know the answer to already, right? These are not your standard questions. These are things that you really have to listen to another person deeply before you can ask the question.
Yeah, and I have to reiterate about the courage thing, because I think in order to do that well, what you're talking about, you have to be able to put your own defensiveness and your own inner dialogue to the side while you're having this kind of conversation, right?
Yes. So one of the things that happens, sometimes people jump into offering advice. I mean, has it ever happened to you when someone just simply starts offering a bunch of advice and they really don't know? They haven't asked you any questions, so they really don't know. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. It's a common problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's frustrating because for the person that is having either some emotion or having some problem, to get advice before the person really understands the situation really can diminish the relationship. And sometimes people lose trust in the process of these kinds of advice giving types of conversation. So if you're trying to build trust, you're trying to resolve a problem, it does take a little bit of time and patience to go into, it's it's kind of more of a coaching approach to having a conversation with someone. But offering advice too soon sometimes will break things down. So we're starting as much as possible from a place of humble inquiry and coaching, where we're really asking questions to build a relationship.
That sounds so great, Kris. And on giving advice, like we can have a whole series on that, which we will, adding that to the list. But so tying back what you said to emotions, I want to just say people do avoid these kinds of conversations about emotions because they're scary. Everyone's uncomfortable. But I want to bring it back to remember emotions as data, because what that will do again is it will really help empower you and others and your understanding of others so that you can have more productive conversations instead of reactive conversations, right? So Kris, to shift gears just a little bit, can you start us off on a discussion of how this is showing up in organizations?
Yeah, and this is a great question because it does show up differently based on the level of the organization. So when I think about organizations, I think of organizations within usually 3 levels, which would be the individual level, the team level, and then the leadership level. Things do show up differently, but of course it's all connected and all important. With individuals, so if there is a person with strong emotions, of course they have feelings that would be potentially disruptive to their work, disruptive to their commitment. They may be struggling. It might be a personal issue. It could be a combination of different things that show up in terms of where these emotions are actually coming from. And we know that with COVID, definitely our lives are much more integrated. So, it used to be that you left home, you would go to work, you'd work, and then you go back home, and you have this sort of transition period between the two places. We really don't have that anymore, especially for people that are working from home all the time. So there are a lot of emotions coming up from various places. And from an individual's perspective, really, it's helpful if they can try to understand the values behind some of the emotions that they have. So understanding our values becomes really important, because if someone crosses a boundary against one of our personal values, that can actually be very triggering and can trigger some emotions that maybe we're not even sure why it happened. So really spending some time to understand ourselves really is time well spent.
Great description about that. Now, how would you say it shows up on the team level?
Yeah, and so a team is a group of human beings, group of individuals that are interdependent with each other. That means they have tasks that they're sharing and giving back and forth, and maybe they're following a workflow or a process. So they have some level of interdependence with each other. And when you have teams that are functioning well, those transitions flow smoothly, right? The workflow moves along, decisions get made, things are communicated. But when people are not working well together for whatever reason, then things start to break down, and the productivity of the team itself will begin to diminish. And they could experience complete apathy where nothing is getting done, or they could experience real intense and unhealthy competition where several people on the team might dominate and other people have really completely withdrawn. So we see all kinds of behaviors that come into the work of a team and the sort of the mission of the team. So we can see a lot of things like that. If they're sort of honoring each other's emotions, if they can handle as part of their team, I'll say their team guidelines, people can express themselves, then they're better off. If no one can talk about their feelings within the team environment, then people will either withdraw or they'll become extra competitive.
Wow, that was a great description about what happens in teams. There's so much going on there with emotions at different levels. Yeah. And that's a great segue into me talking about leaders or supervisors and how I see that showing up with the people I work with. And so one way it shows up, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate, is that one of your team members is really verbally aggressive, potentially verbally abusive at times to other team members. It shows up as sarcasm or snipping or even just, yelling at times. And maybe it has been allowed to go on. Other team members don't want to work with that person. They avoid that person as much as possible. And really it comes down to a fear on the part of the leader to want to address that directly. Maybe they've been doing something to address it, but maybe it hasn't been as direct and powerful as it needs to be. And I think that leaders are sometimes afraid to confront that kind of behavior right up front because they are afraid either it'll make it worse or that person will react that way toward them or continue to act that way toward them as a supervisor or to other team members. Or they're afraid of losing that person, that person might leave or quit. And there's a belief that they have to have that person. And so it is allowed to go on poisoning the team. Mm-hmm. So there's all this emotion showing up on the part of a person with poor behavior in the workplace, and no one is really dealing with it effectively.
Right.
And so and so that's why, it takes, like the topics that we cover, it takes courage to be willing to address that. It's uncomfortable. It's affecting everyone. Someone has to do something. And unfortunately, like I said, it's allowed to go on too long sometimes.
Yeah. And conflict avoidance really doesn't work inside of organizations. Conversations have to happen, and either they happen early when it's a little easier versus happening much later on in a given situation. So I think it's really important for leaders to have these conversations, and certainly could start out as a coaching conversation, but to basically address if it's emotions, that's one thing. If it's emotions that are affecting behavior of the individual and of the team, then they absolutely have to intervene somehow and help their people back on track. So it's really part of the leadership obligation.
Yeah, well said, Kris. And it is so hard to do. It's not an easy thing. So, so on that note, Kris, you want to wrap us up?
So to wrap up, there really are 2 points that I think we want to convey to everybody. The first one is about emotional intelligence and the connection to dealing with emotions in the workplace. Very important. And then the second part is a complement to it, which is really about the conversational skills around courageous conversations.
Yeah, exactly, Kris. And so on emotional intelligence, one of the best things you can do, a great next step, is to expand your self-awareness of your own emotions and what you're feeling, and expand your emotions vocabulary. And so I want to encourage everyone to do a quick Google search. You'll be amazed what you find using emotions vocabulary. There are so many words to describe the different emotions we have. It's not just happy, sad, and angry. And so this would be a great next step for everyone. So encourage that. And then on the point of conversation skills, one great next step for everyone, no matter what your level, is to continue to practice and deepen your ability to practice empathetic listening, active listening. And there are great resources for that too. You can Google search, or I highly recommend LinkedIn Learning for that. So many great tutorials there that you can access if you have the above free version.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much, Leann. Those are really great tips. So everybody, please make sure that you click on the subscribe button and follow us on Courageous Conversations for Leaders and Organizations.
Bye for now.